Let's talk about our first family of contractions in Braille. These are the alphabetic word signs. We're going to talk about how to read and also how to write when a Braille letter is standing alone and the print word that it refers to is standing alone. When I say standing alone, I'm talking about Braille standing alone rule. A word is considered standing alone when it's not connected to other letters. The most easy example of that is a word that has a space before it and a space after it. It's got a space on both sides, it's standing alone. It may also have a punctuation mark next to it. Maybe there's a comma after the word or a period after the word. But that comma or that period or whatever punctuation it is also has a space after it. It's still standing alone, or also has a space before it if it's an opening quotation mark or something at the beginning of the word. So then the word plus whatever punctuation mark is touching it still has a space before and after it. It's still standing alone. In my example sentence, every word here is standing alone. Every one of those words is standing alone if we're talking about the whole word. And that's really the trick of the standing alone rule, that we're looking for whole words that are just there by themselves. A word like sign in, if it's hyphenated, shows an example of words that are not standing alone. Sign is connected by the hyphen to in, so it's not standing alone. In also is not standing alone because the hyphen connects it to the other letters in sign. So neither sign or in is standing alone in the hyphenated word sign in. A part of a word also is not standing alone, like the letters O-N-E in the word alone. O-N-E is the word one. The word one is not standing alone in alone because it's touching the A and the L. It's touching the other letters in that word. So a word can be standing alone regardless of its capitalization, italics, bold, underline, or its meaning, as long as it's the whole entire word and it's not touching other letters, specifically letters. Now that you know what standing alone is, we can get into the alphabetic word sign family. This family of contractions has 23 alphabetic word signs. If these words stand alone in a sentence, they're brailled using just one letter of the alphabet. I bet you've seen something like this before, and it's pretty easy to read. Now that people text, there's all sorts of shortening of words in print in informal settings to just a letter, and people can read them intuitively without much trouble. This is a really easy family of contractions for that reason. But in Braille, we don't just make up any letter that seems logical to the person. It's a very set list. We only use those letters. And the word U is not brailled with the letter U in Braille, but it's brailled with the letter Y. It uses the first letter of that word. So that is a word in our list, but don't get tricked by texting and braille it as a U. That would mean us. So here's our list. These are the 23 words that you need to memorize so that you spot them in any sentence you're writing. You know to use just one letter to braille it if it's standing alone. Also, by memorizing the list, if you ever then see the letter standing alone in Braille, you'll know what word to read it as. That recognition piece is really the easier side for most print readers learning Braille. B means but. C means can. D means do. E means every. F means from. G means go. H means have. J means just, K for knowledge, L for like, M more, N not, P people, Q quite, R rather, S so, T that, U us, V very, W will, X for it, Y, U, Z, as. So some example sentences just to take a look at it. If the sentence said, that is more people, but I will still go, I could braille that sentence with T for that. I would braille out IS for is because there's not a contraction for is in Braille. I would use the M just the letter M on its own for more, just the letter P for people, and then I'd still put the comma after it, just like there was a comma after the print word people. B for but, capital I for the word I, W for will. I would use the ST contraction for still because that also has a word sign that you'll learn in a later unit, and G for go. When still is contracted, it uses a single cell contraction that is the letters ST, but you'll learn those word signs after you've learned those strong group signs that make things like TH, SH, ST, AR common letter pairings. I also want you to note in this case that capitalizing the letter T was equivalent to the print word that with just the first T capitalized. It didn't mean the whole word was capitalized. You'd have to use a word sign capitalization to make that happen. You could still use the contraction and you could do it if it's what it wanted, but there's no confusion in Braille. The number of capital indicators tells you how many letters are capitalized. You're O&Mers in this class, so I want to emphasize what this might look like on signage, Braille signs. Sometimes we see doors where the push bar says exit will alarm. That would just be brailled exit W alarm, and there'd be a contraction in alarm. Maybe you find a service elevator in a building. The sign may say elevator N for P, and you would need to recognize to read that as it's saying elevator, not for people, right? It's a service elevator. Sometimes that's the case. In Braille, if you want to just write a single letter, you need to put a .56 indicator in front of it. That's called a grade 1 indicator or an English letter indicator, depending on what system you're talking from. We put that in front of the letter so that it's not read as the alphabetic word sign. You'll see that on signs probably much more often than word signs themselves, just because of the frequency of it. So for example, level B would use the .56 indicator in front of the letter B here so that you could tell that this is not level but, it's level B. Meeting room D would be another example. You'd see the .56 in front of the D. If the D is capitalized, the capital indicator comes next and then the letter D. If you looked at this sign, you were looking at it with a client, you could probably read out meet, and then you'd say, ooh, I don't know what that last letter is. It's not one of the 26 alphabet letters that I know today. So meet something, room, D. And you could probably figure out from context or from looking at the print on the sign that that grouping that you don't know yet is the ing in meeting room D. So always use your context clues and the information around you to make an informed inference about what a group sign is if you're not exactly sure. It's pretty easy to figure out the print from Braille. It's a little bit harder to figure out how to write Braille accurately. For writing, you really need to know and understand all of the rules of Braille, but for reading, because you already have so much experience reading print and you know what makes sense, it's pretty easy to fill in little gaps here and there just using the logic of what would it make sense for that to say. So you may have noticed that we only had 23 word signs. That means there are some letters without word signs. Any letter that is commonly a word alone in English will not be assigned a word sign. So A, I, and O have no word signs, and that's so that you don't have to use that .56 prefix every time the word happens, right? So A, because A and is a common word in English. I, because the pronoun I is common. Do remember that you have to capitalize I when you're writing the pronoun. You have to capitalize it every time. It's not like writing a lowercase I just means capital I. You need to actually capitalize it if you want it capital. And O, the same thing. O is not as common an English word, but it might appear in songs or something when you're singing O. It's not always spelled with the H. Sometimes it's spelled with the O, and so for that reason, O was not given an alphabetic word sign. There are also 2 letters that have funky word signs. 21 of the 23 letters, the letter that represents the word is just the first letter of the word, right? Super simple, it's the first letter. But there's 2 exceptions that those are the letters X and Z. Not very common. There aren't a lot of high frequency words that start with X or Z. So instead, they were just assigned to two of the most high frequency words. X means it. You might remember X marks the spot where it is. And Z stands for as. We often play off the phonetic that as sounds like it could be a Z, even though it's really a S. So as got the Z letter because it sounds like it's in the word, even though it's not really. All right, so in Braille, whenever you learn a rule, there are going to be exceptions to the rule, and you've got to learn those exceptions too. Word signs can be used when they're standing alone. The exception is there are exactly 6 endings that can be added to a word sign if the word from the alphabetic word sign is the whole root of the word, and the word with the ending, one of these 6 endings on the list, will form a word that is actually standing alone. Those endings all start with apostrophe. They are apostrophe D, apostrophe T, apostrophe S, apostrophe LL, apostrophe RE, or apostrophe VE. Those 6 endings can be added to words that they make sense getting added to, provided that the resulting word does actually stand alone. So examples of this: you'd, can't, do's and don'ts. The do's can be the do contraction. You'll, your, and you've. Those can all use those endings. They can go right on there as long as that bigger word is still standing alone. And you can add these endings to anything in the alphabetic word signs list if it meets those criteria. Counter example, don't, can't use the do contraction because it's touching the N. It doesn't just have the apostrophe T added, it also has the letter N added. So DO is not standing alone. So you cannot use an alphabetic word sign there because you can't use it within a word. So there's kind of the boundaries on where you can stretch it and add an ending and where you can't. So for summary, our alphabetic word signs are going to be used whenever they stand alone, regardless of their meaning. So I have here Will Smith will go, and show that will in the name and will the verb are both brailled with just the letter W. One time it's capitalized, one time it's not. Capitalization and punctuation are okay as long as the word is still standing alone, and it can take those 6 specific endings. Alphabetic word signs cannot be connected to other letters through their punctuation, and alphabetic word signs cannot be used as parts of longer words. Go ahead and study these 23 alphabetic word signs, get them into your long-term memory, and happy brailing!